Okay, so that's recording.
Got it.
And then let me use my backup here. I have another program to record. And that should be recording. Okay.
Awesome.
Jill Emmer, how are you?
I'm well. Greg, how are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Gershowitz, the proud president and founder of Gershowitz Literacy Associates. And today's the kickoff for our series called Gersh Talks. And for the very first one, we're proud and honored to be speaking with Jill Emmer, who is quite the artiste. She's also a well-known author. She'll make sure to give you her details later on, how you can access her book on Amazon and reach out to her for any possible engagements or questions that you may have. Of course, you can always reach out to us at our website, www.gershowitzliteracyassociates.com. We're on Twitter at Gersh Literacy. Jill will also provide you her information. And today we're getting together here for a conversation about the connection between art and social emotional learning. And I think it's important. First off, Jill, we're going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are. But I just want to say that for anybody out there who's listening and you're questioning about art, I think it's important, and Joe will probably agree, art takes many forms, whether it's your traditional paper to pen or pen to paper, or computers, or journaling, or poetry writing, or music playing. Art takes many different forms. And so that's why we're fortunate to have Jill with us here today. To discuss with us the many different mediums that art can serve when we're discussing social emotional learning. So Jill, without further ado, you'll tell us a little bit about yourself, and I will do my best to be quiet and not interrupt, a terrible habit that I have. Go ahead when you're ready.
I have the same habit, but we're both full of ideas that we want to share.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Greg Gershowitz, for inviting me to join with you today. I'm pleased and honored to be part of this and your first Gersh talk. I think that's awesome. We both, I think, want to give and get all that we can for our students in an educational format. For me, that takes the place of being an art educator here in Western Long Island for the last 20 years. Prior to being an art educator, I was an art director, graphic designer for a few different entities. Most recently was Adelphi University's art director. And before that, I worked as a promotional arts director for UNICEF greeting card operation in New York. Degree in ad design, degree in art education, degree in second master's in art history, coming through shortly when I can get that thesis written. We both agree that so much of school and a child's success is based on how they're feeling emotionally, and what we can do as teachers to promote self-confidence, safety, connection, communication, all those wonderful things. So I'm glad and grateful for the opportunity to talk about what our students need today. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. And I think it's important to highlight that not only, we talk a lot about social emotional learning in a post-COVID era, but I really think it's something that's been important for many, many years. It's only that now that it's just being highlighted because of virtual learning and people, experiencing lockdowns for the first time. But specifically, and just to give a little idea about my experience, I've spent the last 18 years working in special education, and so social emotional component has always been at the forefront. But what gets tricky for educators, and where art can hopefully help to bridge that gap, is how do we mesh the academic portion, specifically the standards, and this applies K-21 and beyond, along with the social emotional component within 182 or 185 day school year, and in some cases we only have 44 minutes a day with our students. And so maybe where we want to start is, you authored a book recently that addresses some of the needs of our members of the LGBTQ community. And so if you want to go ahead and speak about that, and we'll see where that leads us.
I'd love to. I will show the cover of this book, ABC Answers for Curious Humans, Help in Understanding Human Identity, available currently only on Amazon, but please connect to me at my website, gemmerimagino.com, for more information about talks and shares with regards to the book's content. I came to write the book because I raised a non-binary child, now adult, and as a single mom,
By the
connecting.
way, I promise you I wouldn't interrupt, but I'm terrible at this. For those who may not be familiar and may still be learning the terminology, could you expand a little bit on non-binary so that we're all in the know and use the correct terminology?
It would be my pleasure. The binary, bi, two, bicycle, two wheels, binary, in terms of gender, has to do with our two most common ones. As we exist in the United States, it's not the same for cultures all over the world, but we have male and female, man or woman, boy or girl. Those are the binaries.
Okay.
One of those sexes is assigned to a child at birth based on their body makeup, based on their blood work, different kinds of things like that. And that child goes off to fulfill their life as a boy or as a girl.
So traditionally at the hospital, when a child is born in the past, it's either been check male or check female.
100%. We do have, I mean, this is another rabbit hole we can go down another time, but there are children that are born, and this is as common as red hair in our country. So that's something to think about. Think about all the people you know that have red hair. Are intersex children that are born with some of both. So
Okay.
very often a doctor will make a decision based on what they see or what the parents want to decide what they're going to do about a child that is born with some of both. And they make a decision, the medical personnel, and that child grows up with that gender assigned to them, but sometimes doesn't feel like that gender. So that's a whole nother kind of thing that's intersex, which is page I in my book.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So back to the binaries. So we have people, human beings of all ages, and we're also kind of understanding children too can grow with a feeling that they're part of both, that some parts of them are male, some parts of them are female. What do they feel inside? And in the years, from long ago, we wouldn't really give any credence to those discussions or those thoughts by those children. Mostly, we would just kind of push that away and, just decide that they couldn't pay attention to those feelings. Right. But now, as we've gotten a little more open-minded and we're trying to see people as who they really truly are, we are coming, as educators, we're more and more familiar with children, even from a very young age, wanting to kind of dip their hands in both because that's who they feel they are. And how do we deal with that? Anyway, so getting back to my point, which you asked me a little while ago, why did I write this book? Because growing up as a mom of a non-binary child and not having many resources, not really even knowing what questions to ask. And
just getting the conversation started.
Just getting the conversation going. And it's also important to understand the difference between gender identity, which is how we refer to ourselves, and sexual identity, which is who are we dating? Who are we dating? Who are we romantically inclined to be with? So those are two separate things. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. So they're
even on the elementary level, you finding that these are discussions that come about or need to be had, or at the very least, you need to be knowledgeable?
I think that we as educators need to be aware of all these things before they tiptoe into our classroom. They might already be there. We don't need to be reciting chapter and verse from this book or giving children more than they're asking. And of course, we need to be respectful of parental involvement, et cetera, 150%. But we are, and I am, and in the art room is particularly a place where children feel safe to express themselves. Many children have more comfort in school than they do at home. So we really need to know what these things mean so we can respond appropriately, have resources in the social worker's office, have resources in the school psychologist's office. So I feel like every adult needs to read this book. You might think, oh, no, not my children. Oh, no, not my nieces and nephews. But we all know someone, or maybe we're not even noticing the person that gives us our coffee in the morning, or the person that's driving the bus, or the person that we're sitting next to in the subway. But people are going through things all over the place, and we need to open our eyes, to learn, to listen, so that before we are, confronted with an issue and made to feel nervous by it, we have the self-confidence and the acumen to deal respectfully with it. And yes, children are now coming to school not matching. Traditionally, we would think that nail polish was only for girls, but that's not the case. It's
No, and
just,
I've seen that, by the way.
yeah. And so how do we react when someone
Right.
speaks disparagingly about Thomas who's wearing nail polish? What kinds of things do we say? Do we say, yes, nail polish is for girls, or do we say nail polish is for anybody? And, those kinds of conversations we need to be having before we need to be having them.
Sure. And I would say both for educators, but maybe people that haven't been inside a classroom since they were students. It's
Mm,
important to realize that from the perspective of an educator, at least in my experience, social emotional learning means how do you address your students both as individuals and then the classroom as a whole, and that could be tricky. And
mhm,
you want to be able to allow your students to express who they are within the classroom, but within a constructive way. And so one of the outlets that I recently found works nicely is if you give students the opportunity to journal. I'm going to be starting reading a book about To Kill a Mockingbird, but especially in a special education classroom, you may have students that are dealing with a number of different logistics and dealing with who they are as a person. And so it's okay. It's okay to tell a student, you know what, why don't you journal today?
mhm,
Because they may not be reading the book, but emotionally they're expressing themselves. And I'll tell you, I recently had an experience with a student. It took me probably from September to February, just before the break, to get her to open up to me. But she
mm,
journaled to me, and I figure, you know what, just give her a chance to put her ideas and thoughts down on a piece of paper. She doesn't necessarily have to share with me, but it was something constructive she could do and still earn credit in the classroom and develop emotionally. Well, wouldn't you know it, information she would only typically share with her counselor, she opened up and shared with me. And there were certain steps I was required to as an educator to take. But first off, for me, that was a big accomplishment, not an
mm.
80 or a 90 on the test, but the student opening up to me. And then I was able to tell her, I really appreciate that we've reached this milestone where you felt you can open up to me. And there are certain steps I have to take as an educator, but her counselors were well aware of her background. And I am now aware of her background. And who knows what other avenues this will lead to. So I think it's important that we discuss social emotional learning. What does that look like? And what does that mean in the classroom? And I mean, I think, and would love to hear your input, Joe, but I think social emotional learning means students are connecting to whatever their emotions are, and they could vary from day to day, especially if you're dealing with adolescents. But being able to express those emotions, whether it's identifying with your book or journaling to the teacher and expressing who they are, I think that's a key component of social emotional learning. What are your thoughts?
I agree 100%, and I'm thrilled to hear that that child found their way, found their wings, that you helped them to locate. I like to practice in my art labs the idea of the 4 C's.
Hmm.
So for all my children, I want to give them care. I want to imbue them with confidence. I want them to connect to their creativity, and I want them to show compassion for themselves and for
Right.
others. So that starting from that perspective, it's not so much about a sheaf of papers and things I need to push inside their heads. It's
Right.
giving them the opportunity to take in the knowledge in a way that feels comfortable for them, in a way that feels that they can keep it in there and they can share with others, because we are trying to create humans, good, happy, well, safe, secure humans. That's part of our
Socially adjusted.
emotionally adjusted, who can be flexible, flexible
Sure.
brain. And we have to be flexible. We have to lead with that. So it isn't
And
the,
that's not easy, by the way, especially, we may have first year teachers who are listening in on this conversation and they're saying, well, I have to do attendance. I have to make sure all the students are sitting. I have to make sure the four walls are standing. I have to make sure my administrator is happy. At the end of the day, and it's easier said than done to a first year teacher, give it time. It will all fall into place and you'll figure out how it works. And my question to you, Jill, was social
yes,
emotional learning. Is that something we just do in September? We get to know the students, we get them comfortable. Then October to June, it's all academics.
we need to have check-ins, frequently have check-ins with our children to see how they're feeling,
That's a good strategy. Yeah.
to put curriculum aside, to just check in on them. In some ways, we can do that publicly with the group as a whole, maybe them holding up a card, they're green, they're yellow, they're red, they need to stop, they need to focus, they need contact, they need connection with their teacher. I'm working with 40 minutes. I have 650 students, 36 classes of artists in 2 schools. So believe me, I understand how that can feel if you look at the numbers, but I look at my students as individuals. When I'm having a conversation with one individual, there could be 12 of them crawling up behind me, wanting my attention, grabbing inside, trying to, get inside my body. Sometimes it feels like, but it's one at a time. It's connecting one at a time, because that child is just one person. And to those children, I am their only art teacher. So they all want me the same at all times. But social emotional learning, particularly coming back from kids being on their own home, from children seeing parents fighting, from children losing their jobs, from children losing loved ones from sickness or moving or jobs or homes changing. They're raw. They're very raw, and they model their behavior based on what they see, even when we don't think they're looking at us. So we need to lead with compassion. We need to have patience. To be a good teacher, a lot of that comes intrinsically. It can't be taught. You must love children to be a teacher. Your curriculum is one thing, but you must just love small humans. You have to. So I think
By the way, I think it's also important to mention that we need to check in with the big humans as well. For those who may be teaching on the secondary level, they need it just as much. And I'm also going to say, because the purpose of these conversations is to appeal to all stakeholders, teachers, parents, administrators, superintendents. And so it's also important to recognize that teachers also need to be checked in with. And I just saw something on Twitter yesterday or the day before. There was a teacher. She was shocked and pleased that somebody actually checked in with her to see how she was doing. It wasn't about the standards. It wasn't about assessments. It was about this idea of we as teachers also need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves. We're doing self-care. And so I would encourage administrators, if it's not something you do now, you may want to consider it. And I don't mean breathing down your teacher's necks either, but check in with them once in a while and just say, hi, how are you? Is there anything you need? And you may not realize how big a difference that can make in the teacher's ability to then check in with the students and be at their very best as well.
I agree 100%. And I think administration, my administration is very much about having resources available when we ask for them. So I think, I support our district for doing that. That's, impressive. But as a pretty self-sustaining individual, I don't ask for help. I don't ask. I think there's many other people who might need things. So that I think that we need to do. Just in general, I kind of to take care of everything, and everybody else comes first before me.
But you could check in with your administration if you needed to.
Yes.
Okay.
But I want to say that, as a teacher, I don't do a perfunctory check with a child. If I get from a child, yeah, I'm fine. I still circle back. Yes. I might pull them aside and say, thinking a little something might be else going on.
Right.
There's a couple of different ways to check in, and adults, I think, when there's so many different things that administrations have to be taken care of, kind of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, not saying anything disparagingly about districts, but just in general, you have to schedule unscheduled time for teachers. Don't, give us 10 minutes at the end of the day to do what we need to do, because it's not going to be for us. It's going to be for our students. So I don't know the answer to that, but I just think that there's a lot of me, and probably a lot of you too, that we're very good at kind of taking care of ourselves and keeping the good, strong face out there. But, maybe as we move forward, this could be looked at differently, because I think that that's what's going to keep teachers in the business, because teachers are leaving. Sadly, they're burnt out. They feel overwhelmed. They don't feel they're talked to. And it shouldn't be that the people who need little are the survivors. It should be that we're all surviving, because we're all given what we need, even if it's different from one another.
And I think that could probably be a part of another conversation where we get stakeholders together to discuss school culture. But as an addendum to providing our little ones and our older ones with social emotional learning, I think it's also important to just mention that teachers need that social emotional support as well. And so we're going to rewind a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How did you get into art? Were you interested in art since you were young?
Always loved art. When I realized I couldn't be the next prima ballerina, I went to my backup, which was art. I had very academically gifted older siblings, and I was kind of a little intimidated by them.
Hmm.
So I thought, art is something I like. And I started really paying a lot of attention to it, art and writing, English and languages. And, found my way through a liberal arts beginning to please dad and mom, and then went off to art school in the city at FIT and absolutely fell in love with Manhattan. And
Wow, quite the eclectic environment to start it off
yes.
here.
But I have to say that my school life at FIT in the 1980s, late 70s, 80s, yes, I'm that old. I
We
befriended.
wouldn't have known, by the way, unless you said
Pardon
it.
me?
We would
Thank
not
you.
have known your age unless you said it.
Well, I didn't actually say it. I just
Okay,
kind of
good.
intimated it.
Okay,
But
even better.
going to school at FIT, I got to know many gay men, and my Long Island background had not brought these wonderful connections to me, and not just gay men, but gay women as well. And we, going through what they went through with the beginning of the AIDS crisis, and how they were treated by society, and how they were not given, even considered that they could go into hospitals, or it was contagious, and AIDS, and Kaposi scars and stuff, it kind of really made me think about how, as humanity, we decide who's good and who's bad, who's going to be successful, who's not. Like,
we tend to categorize people as a society, and if you think about it, from when we're a very young age, we're taking the blocks and putting the blocks in the right shape and the circles in the right. So you've raised an interesting point.
Yeah, so that kind of put it in me right from the beginning, and then raising a child who was, pretty gender typical, but we'd go into McDonald's and somebody would say, do you want the boy toy or the girl toy? And that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because I'd say, well, tell me what the toys are. Who are you to decide which toys are for boys or for girls? I mean, I was just in an art store over the weekend in Connecticut, and I was looking at packs of colorful paper that I'm putting an art camp together for the summer. So I need to buy some color paper. And the names of the pads of paper said things like sunsets or fireworks or skies. And one said girls and one said boys. And I thought, who decided which colors are girls and which colors are boys? Who decided which patterns might be soothing to a boy or attractive to a girl? Why do we need those labels? I mean, pink used to be a boy's color back in the day. And I think that this just made me think anew that we need to think in more non-binary terms when we're talking to our children. I never have boy lines and girl lines.
And you may have a boy walk into your classroom who's wearing what was assumed traditionally to be a girl color.
Or calls himself a girl.
Right.
And we shouldn't have the boys versus the girls, for spelling bees or outside kickball, or, we need to be a more inclusive society in general. And we need to start in school to not be categorizing children by the gender they were assigned or the gender they identify with, because we are more than that.
And that sounds like it may be a tricky thing to navigate, because you may have some districts who, not maliciously, but they may still be behind the eight ball in terms of integrating non-binary terminology into their classrooms, or you might be in communities where it's still not a fully accepted practice. So, as a community, we need to start, it takes a village to raise a child. So we need to start at probably the village level. And there are some that are really great and others that are progressing. For a teacher in the classroom, I think I have some suggestions, but what would you say? You have a student walk into your classroom that doesn't identify as the typical he, she pronouns, and you want to sort of navigate how to build a positive relationship with that individual. And then on top of that, maybe that's not accepted in the home to use anything other than the traditional he or she pronoun. What has been your experience? I know you're on the elementary level. I can speak to the high school level.
Yeah, we are. My current community is not one that's really embracing this or looking out for this kind of information. And we're, they're elementary. So, there's a lot of doing a lot of reading. We actually, our high schools, our middle schools are actually in a different district. So it's not even like we see our kids K through 12. We're a K through 6 district where I'm teaching art currently, which may factor in one way or the other, but I let the children help me to understand. And the incidences of children being gender nonconforming. If there is one that's coming in, a child that's coming in like that, we're all brought in as a little meeting, so we're made aware. If a classroom teacher, because I only see the children for 40 minutes once a 6-day cycle, I don't see them all day long.
Okay.
So I have to say that most typically I'm pulled in before it's an issue, so I'm made aware.
Okay.
But there are many times where I will go out of my way to connect to a child that's kind of on the outside looking in, because I can just see how their peers are treating them. And, typically this might be a girl who calls herself a girl, and she's a she, her, but she wears a lot of basketball shorts and big t-shirts and
Okay.
is not wearing the tight body, attention kinds of clothes and things like
Sure.
that, and plays football with the boys and doesn't want to do the girly things. And people have, call something out about, oh, she doesn't like that. She's not a girl, or she's, so we're not men or women by what we're wearing. If you put on a woman's outfit right now, you'd still be a man. You just have on, clothes that were typically associated with women. So that I am, cannot be a spokesperson for this in my job as an art educator. That's not copacetic with my district, and nor should it be, because we shouldn't be confusing the children. But I kind of am back there being supportive and having the things in place for the child to feel, hey, I always want to pick the lacy stuff, the pink stuff, not the blues, not the greens.
Right.
And, Miss Emmer is going to love me and support me. And that's, even if it's just a quietly done, that's important to do.
And so I would certainly say, in the majority of my experiences on the high school level, irregardless of high school policy, it's been strongly impressed upon me in a loving way by administration that making the students feel comfortable and accepted is
number one
priority. And that's the case for me as a teacher. And I have a very unique and individual way that I go about building a rapport with my students. And you have to take different approaches with different students. But regarding those who prefer non-binary terminology, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm still learning this myself, but depending on my relationship with the student, I will just outright ask the student, how do you prefer to be addressed? And I will tell them, you know what? And as a first-year teacher, you may not be aware that this is okay, but as a teacher that's been doing this for a while, it's okay to say, you know what, I'm a human, I make mistakes. Please correct me so I know what to do moving forward. And they're pretty understanding. And these are teenagers, by the way. So by virtue of the fact that they're teenagers, they're going through changes every single day. But for those who are also figuring out who they are and their identity, you have students who tend to be very self-aware, and you have other students who are just engaging now in the process. And so I think if you take a soft, loving approach while still maintaining consistency and rules and order in your classroom, you'll be fine. And you know what? It's also okay to realize, or you should realize, what works with a student on Monday or what works on a student in September may be completely different come January or March or February. And so, the private sector doesn't tend to always understand that as teachers, we're not just teachers, we're also clinicians, we're psychiatrists, we're psychologists. And so there's a lot that goes into that 40 minutes that we spend with the students who we may only see once a day or once every other day. So my advice to newer teachers out there is, I know it's easier said than done, but take it day by day. Let the students know that you're a human, and always have a willingness to be receptive and understanding, and you'll be fine.
I think that's wonderful. And just to go off that point, sure. Pronouns, not so important for little kids. I think they use the wrong pronouns for themselves half the time, sure. Just like learning a new language. Sure. But people ask me all the time, or they'll make kind of disparaging comments about what's with the pronouns. Clearly, I'm a woman, so my pronouns should be she, her. Or clearly, I'm a guy. Like, this is so annoying to me.
And I actually see people specify in their emails.
But here's what.
She, her, and I didn't know what that was at first.
It's to show that you are an ally, because some people need, they want to use pronouns that might not be typical. The MX pronoun, for example, which is a way of putting
that's new to me, by the way.
That's
That's the first I'm hearing of this. Maybe I should go order
Okay.
your book.
You haven't? Right here, MX, page MX, page X.
Okay.
MX is a way, we learn about, we have Mr. and just one Mr. Any male gets a Mr. It doesn't say if he's married or not, but we have a Mrs. and we have a Miss. So that gets to reveal the woman's marital status, which women started to complain about years ago because they didn't want to go for a job interview and be a Mrs. Now people ask them about when are they having birth, how many months are they planning to take off for the kids? So men would get hired. This is a male society, a male, patriarchal society. So back in Gloria Steinem day, we got the idea of Ms., MS, because that was a title for a woman that didn't let in whether she was married or not. She was female. But taking that one step further, trans individual, non-binary individuals, queer individuals said, hey, why do I need to say if I'm applying for a job and I'm sending a letter to somebody if I'm a man or a woman? Or maybe I'm neither, but I need a title because a title gives it some clout, some more, some seriousness.
Right.
They took a signal from the Latinx. I hope you're familiar with Latinx.
That I am, yes.
Because in the Latin-based languages like Spanish and French, Italian.
O for male and A for feminine.
Yes, there's a different adjective, Latina, if you're female, Latino, if you're male. Right. So they thought, why do we have to have gender when we're describing the Latin population? So they came up with Latinx, which encompasses everybody.
Right.
Typically, Latino could mean male and included the Latinas in the Latino. Like if you say you have children, you say, I have, tengo dos niños, I have two children. It means I have dos niños, two boys, or it means I have two children. So MX was a way of taking all of that out of the equation.
Sure.
And just being an adult individual with this was your term. So pronouns, we use them a lot. A lot of countries don't use them the same way we do, but people started thinking, maybe I look female leaning, but I'm actually male. Maybe I'm maybe I'm taking medication. I'm in the process of changing my gender. Maybe I'm transitioning and I want to start this job being, female. So it was a way for just kind of it took the oomph out of it if everybody would do it. It wouldn't be so like, look at him. Who does he think he is? Or who does she think she is? Or that's so unnecessary. Because I get that smack all the time from people saying, clearly you're so feminine. Why do you have to say Miss or Miss? And I think, why are you so angry? Why are you so upset that I'm putting pronouns on my Twitter handle or putting pronouns on my Instagram page or my any of my sites? This just identifies me as being an ally. I say my pronouns, it allows you to tell me yours. So, I've had parents say to me, there's this little kid that comes over and it's my daughter's friend. And I kind of think it's a girl, but, they use the name, Bailey, and I'm not really sure because it's not a girl's name or a boy's name. What do I do? And then you say, hi, I'm Mr. Jones. I use, he, him. Hey, Bailey, I'm glad you're over the house today. What are your pronouns?
Right.
And if we take it, it just helps other individuals, other humans to know they're in a safe place. We recognize them. We see them. It's okay to be awkward. We don't have to understand this like in a minute, but we need to have these conversations and enable people to feel like they can be seen for who they are.
And so let me ask you, being your expertise, not only about gender in your publication, but art, for those of us who may be dealing with students who are going through some sort of trauma, they're going through identifying who they are, who may be transitioning, how can art help them deal with those emotions? Is it a matter of painting? Is it a matter of drawing? What are your suggestions?
I think art is a wonderful way. I mean, kind of intersected the idea of being an art therapist before I became an art educator. But I think that whenever we're presenting, particularly as somebody who doesn't feel like creatively they have anything to offer, I usually start by talking about an artist who found their voice through art and was able to do something with art. And I also remind children or any human that art in the typical sense, is really about self-expression. It's about something you need to say. You're doing it with color and shape that you're not doing with words or music. It's just a different way of expressing yourself, so
Right.
that whatever you do is okay. Whatever you do is okay because it's your expression. No one can tell you you didn't do a good job with expressing yourself.
And as a side note, by the way, to this whole idea of social emotional learning, something I also saw recently is it's okay not to be okay. And
Mhm.
art is something that can help you to address that. And I know plenty of adults, and this happened before COVID, but we may have some superintendents or principals or teachers or even parents. Have you heard about this trend where adults are sitting down and coloring books
Absolutely.
because it's such a stress reliever? I know my wife on the iPad, she has an app
Mhm.
where it's paint by number, and you finish the painting by number series, and there's this whole pomp and circumstance at the end with fireworks and a lot of
Mhm.
happiness. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking about art and the ability to just like help you chill out and
Yeah,
deal with
I
what might
think
be
that
going on in life.
that's true in general, in a broad sense that,
Sure.
Crayolas, how could you go wrong with a Crayola? But I find more and more, especially with having my eyes open, that some kids don't have even the basics at home, or
Mm,
were taught that they weren't good at something. Like I think in one of our last conversations, you were joking about, I'm not good at that, or I can't put a
that's right. I
stick
said I couldn't
together.
draw a straight line with a ruler, and
Right.
you're
So
supposed to
when
protect them.
parents say those kinds of things in front of children,
Right.
children, soak that in. They're infused with that.
Internalize.
If my dad, the adult, can't do it and
Mm,
is laughing at himself about it, that means I probably can't do it, or should I laugh at myself? So that when I start even teaching children about art or anything, it's really about process. It's just about putting colors on paper. Try this technique. It's not about trying to magically, create something that matches mine or looks realistic. Because in our past conversation, we talked about how many people think that the best art is the art that matches life or looks hyper realistic, or
right.
and that's, to me, not the best art. The best art is when I can see something different that I wouldn't see, someone else's perspective or some other way of looking at something.
Perspective, that's a key word.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this wonderful African-American artist, Horace Pippin, who
Mm,
was injured in the war and couldn't use his left arm, and decided to become an artist, and had never had any art classes, but felt that he could say things with his paintbrush that he couldn't say. And he wasn't treated, fabulously well by the society in which he lived.
mm.
But putting his art on paper, that was his, he was in charge, and he could do that. He could do that canvas. That was his, and no one could tell him otherwise. And now, even though his style is very rudimentary, very basic, it's not all about shading and depth and these kinds of things. It's very flat and simplistic. The stories he tells in his paintings help people to understand what must it have been like for an African American man to go to war for his country and come back from that war
You have to
and not
fight
be able to,
for acceptance.
use, the bathroom, not be able to rent a
Mm,
room in the South when he was traveling, so
sure.
that uh, I think that, and that's how I start with children, that we need to get into the mind of that artist, understand what they were going through before we have an opinion about them. Same for me. I can't have an opinion about your art and say you did a good job or a bad job until I hear about how you feel about what you've done. And that's just a lot of listening, a lot of not talking, even though I'm very good at talking.
Oh, well,
Um,
you don't have to tell me. I'm just as good.
yeah. So a lot of listening. I think we're both very excited about stuff, but I think with little children, stopping and just letting the conversation kind of rise and see which way it goes, and helping children to talk to each other. That's very important for educators, I think, because they're going to have these connections after school. I'm going to still be in school, but they're going to go out into the world. How can they learn to talk to people that are different from them, feel safe? Children don't know how to really talk to each other because they're always texting.
Huh.
So that, and again, back to the social emotional learning, I create a lot of setups in my classroom where we're, doing gallery walks or walking around and looking at artwork, where I give them the words to use when
Sure.
they're describing other people's work. Not it's good, it's bad. I
And I think
like
the
it, I
part,
don't like it, you know?
sure, we're not there to judge. We want them to express, and it is okay once in a while to step in and say, maybe you want to try this next time,
Mhm.
or try this technique. That's part of being a teacher. And that's where that balance between academic and social emotional learning can be tricky. But I also think you mentioned something where, I have to constantly remind myself the listening piece.
Mm.
I'm very good at the talking piece, but I have to remind myself when a student is expressing, if they're having some trauma. The other day, I had some students that were upset with each other, and I walked out with them, and I was talking and listening. I was saying to myself, make sure you're listening, not doing all the talking, because sometimes I've learned if you just listen to the students, they'll tell you all you need to know. If you
Right.
just sit in the back of the classroom and just hover a little bit and listen to what they're saying, you'll gain a lot from that. The other point I want to make is you're talking about art and understanding the artist. So, and we mentioned this previously, when I was in college, in undergrad, I had to take an art history class. And
Mm.
and I'm a history major, that was my undergrad. And so when I heard art history, I sort of whined and moaned, and I said, why can't I do digital photography? And I tried everything I could to get out of the class. Well, wouldn't you know it? I, we had a gentleman art teacher. He had retired, but was substituting one semester for a colleague. And we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Mm.
And I can't necessarily call the name of the particular painting, but the concept behind the painting is depending on your mood or perspective at that particular moment, it looks like the man in the boat is going to be swallowed up by the
Mhm.
storm, or maybe he's going to make it out and be just fine. And it was through the art professor facilitating that knowledge to me that I gained an appreciation and a joy of art and the possibilities of expression and understanding. And I ended up writing, he didn't need any recommendation from me. He was an older gentleman, he was retired, but I wrote a letter or a postcard of some
Wonderful.
sort to the director of the department where I admittedly said, I tried everything I could to get out of this class. And it was
Hmm.
through this experience that I'm glad that I had to still take the class. And so I think art is a really valuable means to understanding the world around us and preparing both our young ones and our older ones to go out. We want them to go out into the real world. And if we can't teach them to have perspective and understanding in the real world, and certainly as teachers, we have to tippy toe. You said at the beginning, it's not our place to infringe upon what a parent may want or what a parent teaches their child. But as teachers, again, that word perspective, we can offer another perspective and another avenue. And maybe for schools that are listening in and wondering, well, how can I help students or the parents who are maybe born in a different time period to gain a better understanding of whether it's students who may be transitioning or figuring out who they are or the value of art. Maybe they want to have a paint night. I see these things online all the time, and I'm not encouraging anybody to do this unless they're interested. Sip and paint or
I
painting.
do that too.
Okay, so you're the perfect person. So
Yes.
I think we cover the gamut. We're talking about students, but in order for that village to raise the child, we need to get everybody involved. And so whether that means a school wants or a PTA wants to facilitate a sip and paint for the adults, or maybe a program where students can show off their artworks in some sort of town hall or a special event, everybody can get involved in some way. And those of us who say, well, I'm not very good at art, we need to be positive. We need to say we can make some sort of contribution. And it's all about creating a community of understanding. And for some communities, it'll take more time than others to get there, but we can get there. And so, what are your thoughts about involving the community in the classroom and
I
with art?
have three great points that connect with what you said.
You probably have more than three, but
I
go ahead
do, but
with the
I'm limiting
three.
myself because I think I'm sucking the air out of the room here, Greg.
No, that's okay. We
Um,
appreciate it. Go ahead.
okay, my first thing is when you were talking about listening to kids, I
Yeah,
think something I learned as a parent, and my child is way older than your children, I imagine, but was when we need to talk to our kids, we can say to them, do you want me to listen or do you want me to give advice?
interesting.
Because we are so good at telling kids how to do everything better.
Hmm.
Do we actually just let our kids talk to us without judgment? I had to really look at myself because my kid would call me from college and say, I just want to talk to you. Stop telling me what to do differently.
Right.
Or else my kid would say, that's how a 35-year-old talks. I don't talk like that because I'd say, well, you need to get your friends together and talk about your feelings. And my kid would say, Mom, we don't do that. So that
And it's not an exact science either.
I'm
You
making a
learn
joke
through
about it, but
experience.
we do a lot of times we don't just listen and let them talk. And sometimes we can say,
Right.
I'm not sure you're telling me this kind of sad thing that happened to you. Would you like me to, of course, I feel what you're feeling, but would you like some advice? Or is it just good for me to just listen and hug you? So that's respecting your kid where they are. That's number one.
That's great advice.
Very good thing. Another thing I was saying when you were talking about educators, I think that as educators, we get called to the carpet lots of times, or me never, but we get, complaints come in, we have to answer complaints. How often do we get thank yous? How often does a parent take a minute to say, hey, what you did Tuesday, I don't know what you did, my kid came home happy. I think that teachers and educators, even administrators, are feeling a little bit overwhelmed with fixing so many things all the time. And if we can take a moment, and I know I try to do this when I'm helped by a wonderful salesperson, or when I have a great nurse in a doctor's office, to take a moment to look at that person and say, thank you very much. To support, just as we support our kids, educators need support, and we'd like to be supported by parents. When we do something right, let us know. Take a minute, let us know. That means a lot. And the last thing, when you were talking about a paint night, I think children and parents doing things together is really what we need to do, because kids are separated so many times. But to have something in schools, and I've done this, and I would love to do more of it as we become more and more open again.
Sure.
An art night for parent and child.
Interesting.
Because I did one many, many years ago, and we did contour drawing, and the kids came in, they brought their parents. They were so proud. Sometimes it might have been a grandparent or a neighbor or an older sibling. And I, orchestrated how there was this part where the child was the artist and this part where the parent was the artist. And it was just such a enriching experience for the children and their families, because the kids got to show off their school and got to be like, yeah, that's my art teacher. Yeah, this is a pencil. And here's how you sharpen it, Mom. And you can get tissues over there. So they just love being in charge.
And did the parents let loose?
And then they got to support their parents, and they weren't being told what to do. So their parents would be a little embarrassed about starting this new artistic technique or something. And they got to encourage their parent, and that made them feel so strong and self-confident. Because as I said, the 4 C's, care and confidence, creativity and compassion. So that's something that I'd like to do more and more, is have a, like a PTA night at school where parents and kids come in, or kids and, keep that connection. So they go home and they keep talking about it. What happened in art today? Look at this beautiful painting. Hey, would you like to go to this museum? Because in art, as I always say, 2 and 2 doesn't always equal 4. And that's something that children need to be reminded of. Your way is the way.
Right.
We might tell you to try a different thing. We might tell you to be a little bit neater, or use this color instead. You might have a different effect, but it's not right or wrong. And here's a place in school where you're safe and you can express yourself, and you can take that security into the world and be a wonderful human.
And so I think a key component to social emotional learning, in addition to what we've already mentioned, is positive reinforcement.
Absolutely.
And as a teacher, what I've learned in my later years as a teacher is that it's not just our students that are struggling that need positive reinforcement, but it's also our students that are doing really well. Talking about that, we only have 40 minutes a period, or 45 minutes, whatever the case may be. We're quick to call home for the students that are struggling. So-and-so was using their cell phone in class, or so-and-so did this, or so-and-so did that. But I've tried to make it a much more routine thing this year to call home.
Me too.
And do positive calls. And it's sometimes I'll call the parents, and the parents are shocked. They'll say, did my child do something wrong? You call me. Is everything okay? And I say, yes, everything is fine. I wanted to make it a point to go home and say, so-and-so is doing really well in class. They frequently participate, just positive reinforcement. I guess sometimes, that deficit model or triage model, we're so quick to, make a handful of calls home for the students that are struggling. It's also important in regards to social emotional learning that we're making positive phone calls home. And so when you were saying, we would like for parents once in a while to say, thank you so much, I appreciate it. we also need to make sure that we're not forgetting about the students who are doing really well in the class as well.
Absolutely. I think that I learned as a parent that children are going to listen to you when they're doing something wrong if you've been telling them what they're doing right. So if you're constantly barraging your child with, no, that's not good enough. No, do this. Oh, you're so messy. Oh, this, da, 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 da. But you're never stopping to say, hey, wow, you left your room so nice today. Thank you so much for that. Boy, you tied your brother's shoes. We might think we need to do that. It's also, it helps us be in the right mindset, I think, as humans. Hey, I had no traffic to getting to work. Wow, there was no line at Starbucks. Like all those little things, we
Right.
tend to always categorize the negatives. We don't reflect on the positives. And I think that, yes, I do the same thing with notes home or stickers or, to parents to let them know I want it to be one-to-one. And I think that doing that PR too, as an educator, for educators listening, do that PR where you have a great day and kids do things great. That parent will listen to you when you say something went wrong if you've also spent the time to say when something went well. So, and us as parents, if a child is going to listen to you when you say they need to do better or they didn't do something the way they should have, if you've also told them, hey, what a great week you had last week. Oh my gosh, you were so kind when grandma called. Thanks for cleaning up the potato chips on your own. Hey, you emptied the dishwasher. Like, love that team spirit, whatever it is. That's important too. Kids will listen more frequently if you've told them that they've done something right. They tend to tune us out if they're always hearing what they've done wrong. Students too.
And so to summarize, it seems like everybody needs a bit of social emotional learning, not just the students, the teachers, the parents, the administrators, everybody. And so I think this was really valuable. Now we are going to wrap up shortly, but I do have one last question for you. For those of us who are not art teachers and we're not art teachers in the art classroom, are there ways to incorporate art as a means of social emotional learning, let's say in the science classroom or the social studies classroom or the English classroom? I don't know if that's a question you've ever been asked or pondered, but and if I'm putting you on the spot, I apologize, but I'm curious to know what you might think.
I think there's always a place for a creative eye in any class if that teacher is willing to give it. I can't think of hard, fast rules for each one of the different disciplines you mentioned,
Sure.
but I think that for people who feel very self-conscious about their creative expertise, sometimes it's hard when they're put up against other people doing it differently. Sometimes that's where a group comes in or a peer partner comes in, like, even if it was something like, let's take a look around the room and find something that's really pretty or really attractive to us that catches our eye. What's something, Bob and Sam, what are something that really, that light bulb, we really like that light bulb. Describe us. And you could be using use adjectives, use describing words, use colors, or finding, three things that are the same color and the same, different versions of the same color. So using an eye, stopping and looking and taking around the, the magnificence and the beauty of everything that's around us. Kids are like this on their phones. They don't look. I mean, students of mine don't even know what's hanging on the bulletin board outside the art room because they're not looking around. Children don't look out the windows when they're in cars because they're on television sets or they're on iPads. We didn't have that as children. We were always looking outside, always using our imagination. We have to help children connect to their imaginations. Right. They don't really know what their imaginations are or are supposed to be doing. It's starting with the basics. I mean, and it's in those times where we force kids, we take away their electronics. They're looking out the window or we're doing license plate game. It's during those times where our brains are kind of pressured that we start to think about new ideas, and maybe it's a, cure for cancer. Maybe it's an end to world hunger, or things happen when we're not expecting them, right. But our minds have to be engaged. And I think that for a lot of our students today, they're not fully engaged, and we have to figure out new ways to excite them. And art is a great way to do that.
And, on the graduate level, and we'll finish up here, I took a class called Universal Design for Learning, UDL. I think you can go to their website, udl.cast. And the idea behind it is reaching the most amount of students you can in terms of your presentation of the information and their representation of the understanding the information that you've presented to them. And so, I have a lot of experience in the social studies classroom, and I think one way to incorporate art, show paintings of the time period, whether
Mhm.
it's if it's U.S. history, show paintings from the Civil War era. If it's global history, show paintings from the Renaissance, and show students a different perspective, a word we've used often here, as a means to connect to the. We always want to try and get them to connect to the content, and if we
Right.
can use art as a way to make that happen, that's fantastic. And in terms of them expressing their understanding, our students, letting them make a collage or some sort of presentation or write a poem. It won't always fit, but when possible, that is something that I think, would both encourage educators to try and do.
Yeah, I think connecting with other educators, we have wonderful colleagues. I have to respond to your idea about finding art from different periods. That was a typical thing that we did when I was in school, but all of those people were white men. So that,
Mm,
we don't want to, people might say,
interesting.
okay, so they were all white men
So
painting. And
diversity.
yes, so a spin to that is, what might it look like if someone painted it now? Or
Uh,
how would you paint it if you were painting it now?
wow, that's so
Um,
valuable. That's something that's
Kehinde
really a good
Wiley, there's a
point.
wonderful African-American artist, Kehinde Wiley, who has, painted a fabulous portrait of Barack Obama. And a lot of his work has focused on the idea that in, the Rococo periods and the Renaissance periods,
Mm,
everybody was white, and that so children go to museums, brown and black skinned children go to museums and don't see any of their, people that look like them in these
mm,
positions. Oh, well, they
such a
were
valuable point.
indentured servants, they were slaves back then, or they were
Huh,
taken from their country. So he took some of these subjects like big horses and long curly hair, and instead he put in black and brown skinned people and kind of turned it upside down, which has really made people think. Some people just get mad and say, well, it's not supposed to be like that. It wasn't like that. No,
right.
it wasn't like that. And why wasn't it like that? And let's have a conversation about that. So always, we have to articulate, and that's where you and I, if we were working together and you're in social studies or history and I'm in art, we would have that conversation. You would say, hey, I want to do something artistic. And you
That
might say,
means
how
for
about we do
collaboration.
paintings? And I'd say, absolutely not.
Yeah,
We're going to do this instead. So, I think that it's important to connect to other colleagues, because we get
sure.
kind of in our little boxes and we're all interested, we all have different pedagogies and we all love what we do. How can we help each other to do better? So I think that's, again, it's like 10 years ago, I might not have had that thought, but
Hmm.
I don't teach, Vincent van Gogh and Rembrandt and every single white European male. I have women in there, and I have people from different cultures and people who haven't been acknowledged, and contemporary artists, because I think it's important to show a broad scheme of
And
people who
I've,
are creative.
and as I've mentioned previously, and we're going to end here, I'm doing research on culturally responsive pedagogy. And so you've added now a new element for me to consider when I'm doing my research. And so overall, Jill Emmer, I think we've added many layers to the onion for our stakeholders
Yes.
that are listening in, but quite the valuable onion that is.
Mhm.
Please go ahead and be clear in telling people how they can get in touch with you, how they can get a hold of your book.
I sure will. This is my website. I have it up here on the screen for anybody who needs to come back to it. So it's
Excellent.
www.gemmerimagino.com. So going to that website will give you ways to get in touch with me.
And your Twitter is at Jill Emmer _art.
Right here at Jill Emmer _art, A-R-T.
Fantastic.
And this book, this wonderful book, I have other books in mind, is available on Amazon for a mere $12.99, the price of 2 oat milk lattes. And, there's many things in this book that don't have to do with gender, but have to do with us as humans and what kind of, character traits we should all have. Like empathy is a big one. Like joy. What's joy feel like? What's joy look like? And the words on the side of the page, the side of the letter, help to make conversation, so that, people say, well, this is too much for little children to read. And I say, when you hold this book in front of a small child, they'll find the colors interesting. And you can talk about what respect means. And you can also talk about what it means to be queer. And that means you're just not fitting in any mold that was preordained for you before you were even born. So that it's important for us to see these words, be reminded of these words. This on the side helps us to make connection, because just like we realized years ago as illustrators, not every brown-skinned child lives in a tenement. Not every white-skinned child lives in Boston proper. There are
Right.
people in many different socioeconomic groups, and when children only see themselves represented one way in the world, they start to feel like, what are their choices? They're limited. So having these words someplace where someone can read this book, oh, L is for lesbian. My two aunts live together and they love each other. That's cool. Wow, look at that. So giving validation to these things that are going on in our world after you understand them first is very important. And I thank you, Greg, for letting me run my mouth here for a very long period of time about things that I'm so passionate about.
Well, Jill Emmer, we should certainly appreciate your time. And again, I'm Greg Gershwitz, president and founder of Gershwitz Literacy Associates. We offer tutoring in the traditional subject areas. We also offer workshops, and we also consult with school districts and other organizations. Please feel free to reach out to us at our website, GershwitzLiteracyAssociates.com. You can also reach us by telephone at 631-803-2752 or on Twitter at Gersh Literacy. And so, Jill Emmer, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down speaking with us. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Greg.
I learned some new things that I didn't think of or know of in the past. And so I'm already benefiting from Gersh Talks. And so thank you, be well, and we hope to talk to you again sometime real soon.
Terrific. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.